Okay, hi everyone. So a very great Thursday evening to all of you, and welcome to Making, Measuring and Moving, Designing During Uncertainty. So I'm Daryl, and thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday evening. And we're so privileged to hear from our three creators, from creators of three of our very wonderful projects today, before we move on to a very short session of a question and answer. So, throughout the whole session, please get your questions ready, and we'd love to hear from you at the same time. So this event is organized by the Design Singapore Associates Network and the Design Singapore Council, supported by the National Design Centre. So this event is also part of the National Design Centre's Next Gen program, which stretches all the way from October to November 2020. So this is the rough kind of run through of what's happening today. So, I'm just going to start off with a very quick introduction to what the Design Singapore Associates Network is before we hear from the speakers of our three projects. So firstly, I'm part of the Design Singapore Associates Network, also known as DAN. So we're a group of designers, and we come from all different fields of design, and we believe in the good that design can do. So we love working with others to create different kinds of platform to showcase good design, especially design, that has a certain particular purpose. So right now, I would just like to share with you about Play, Tomorrow's Tropical Cities. So this is an exhibition that's happening at the National Design Centre. So I hope some of you have had the chance to visit it already. And for those of you who haven't, it's on until the end of the month. So this project, started also because of COVID. So during this time, during these troubling times, we think about how important play is. When we're stressed, when there are all these when there are different kinds of challenges along the way, we always feel that play becomes more important and really so crucial to our everyday lives. So it helps us look at things from different angles as we readapt constantly, almost like a game. We're always finding different ways to approach the challenges that we face. And what we want to show is that it's not just about play being something that happens when you're a child, but also that play happens in all facets of our lives, from our work, from the spaces around us, and how this can be turned into a playground of sorts. So throughout the kinds of work we do, we also ran two different exhibitions last year. So this is called The Future of Craft Food, and it looks at our local hawker food through the lens of design. So how different designers have interpreted our basic dishes, and how it's so wonderful to see what different designers, how we see them. And we also had this other exhibition called Never Too Old, which looked at picture books and the power of storytelling, and how just like the title, you're never too old, because picture books and stories are so unique and so special that everyone benefits, everyone can learn, and we really do learn so much from all of these. So some of the other events we do, like what you're attending right now. So we have a studio on the top of the National Design Centre, and on the roof, we have different sharing sessions talking about how design impacts all of us, and also in different areas like healthcare. And we also run certain other events like a portfolio clinic that links established designers with students with young designers who are looking to break into the field. So we're really glad that today we have a lineup of very meaningful projects, and I'm really excited to introduce all of them to you. So I just want to start off by saying 2020 has been a very, very strange year indeed. So uncertainty is very much a theme of everything that's been happening so far. We've learned how to redefine work. We found different ways of coping with the challenges, and just how we're going to survive in the midst of all this. So as I'm sure many of you have observed, we all react very differently, and personally, it's been a very big challenge. So I think one thing that I've learned is how to be a bit more aware of the struggles that I'm going through, and also how to care for myself. But I feel that in the midst of all this, we must also be extremely aware of how we can help others, and especially those of us who are involved in the creative industry, what our role is during these times. So I want to introduce our first speaker, Donnell, who's going to be sharing with you a little bit more about making meaning. So this is a wonderful project that's a ground-up community initiative. And it brings creatives and nonprofits together as they volunteer their talents, and how they kind of bring some amazing projects to life. So let me pass the time over to Danelle.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Danelle from Making Meaning, a platform that connects nonprofits with volunteer creatives. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Making Meaning before, but in today's sharing, I'd like to bring you on a journey of why and how I started Making Meaning and the impact it's actually made on the community so far. Okay. So when the circuit breaker started and everyone began working remotely from home for the first time, it was actually a very stressful period for most of the creative community. I work at a branding consultancy called Somewhere Else. And when businesses began to falter, many of them actually cut their design budgets or canceled events that we were working on. And we suddenly found ourselves with much less work than we usually had. So between working together to find new work and reinventing the services we're offering to be more relevant, we actually had pockets of time that needed to be filled. And so what we did was to keep ourselves occupied was to brainstorm new ideas and resources to help the rest of the creative community. So here are some of the things we came up with at first. A cheat sheet for designers who are looking to make their portfolio stand out during interviews. Um, a list of free and fun resources like virtual studio tours and useful talks for creatives stuck at home, and even worksheets to teach your kids design thinking and problem solving while you're busy working. So while stuck at home, I also found myself reading much more news than usual. To keep updated, I began following all the news outlets on Telegram, to see all the latest developments on COVID-19. And the topic of charities having significant drops in donations, as well as other issues like migrant worker rights, kept cropping up. Yeah, it was really saddening, but at the same time, pay cuts and needing to support my family made it really tough for me to donate as much as I wanted to. So when the government actually gave out the $600 solidarity payout, it was a perfect opportunity to give back. So many fellow creatives like Qi Yun, who runs the account The Weird and Wild, actually urged the community to help out. And I was actually really moved by the amount of support that, the rest of the creative community gave. So it was around this time that I also chanced upon this very lovely campaign called Home for All by the collective of migrant efforts that was illustrated and designed by Ned and Jackie from 8 Spot. It received so much traction and they actually exceeded their goal, raising close to $1 million, which is quite amazing when you think about it. Because of this campaign, I really started to think about how design can make an impact. And at the end of the day, fundraising is all about communicating a story and a need in a way that touches the hearts of others, which is exactly the role of design. So after donating my $600 to various organizations, I continued to donate at first, but after a while, it was quite a strain on my personal finances. And I realized it wasn't feasible to, keep donating the amount each month despite my best intentions. If you look at this slide, in an industry survey done by Don't Mind If, many other creatives also struggled financially with a loss of income, salary cuts, and difficulty finding a job. So this really pushed me to think about donating in a different way. If I can't donate money, how else can I give back? Could design help nonprofits raise awareness and make more money instead? So that's actually how I started Making Meaning. For nonprofits, they have so many things to worry about, least of all design. So I knew it really be a bit of an uphill battle to convince them of its value. But I felt that, it really had the potential to increase outreach and visibility for them in a world where branding is so important and so powerful. So how the site works is that it's simply a website that functions like a job board. So you can click on available projects and there's a list that you can explore. So volunteer roles are actually on an ad hoc basis. So creatives can ask questions and check out the timelines to ensure that it's something they can commit to before they start. I actually set this site up and did all the copy and illustrations in about a week and a half so that I wouldn't end up sitting on it for a long time. Yeah. When I first launched the site, I actually posted about it on Reddit for feedback, which meant that I got quite a few cynical viewpoints on it. people commented on how, volunteering design services was a really bad idea. And they actually insinuated that offering skilled work pro bono was equivalent to devaluing the design profession. They cited many instances where, nonprofits or any organization could be very demanding, especially when they're not paying cash for the services they got. So these were all very valid points. And I did feel a bit discouraged when I read all of the comments. I thought to myself, did I make a mistake? But when I thought about it more, I realized that pro bono design is not the same as free design or designing for exposure. In the same way, a chef volunteers his skills to cook for the needy, or a driver transports food for the underprivileged, giving your design skills for a cause that you care about is no different. So what really matters is how you approach the project so that your nonprofit values the services you are giving. So that's why beyond a simple job board, Making Meaning became much more. It became a platform for education for both creatives and nonprofits, addressing misconceptions and teaching both sides to set boundaries when working on projects. I started off quite simply, so actually just creating guidelines and putting them in place to protect both parties so as to avoid misunderstandings and things like excessive changes further down the line. For creatives, I wanted them to really value their work and understand that when you choose to offer it pro bono for a cause that you care about, it's an amazing thing to do, and you should never feel bad about it lah, or let someone else make you feel bad about your choice to do that. Yeah. For nonprofits, I realized that many of them actually knew very little about creative work and the impact it can make. In fact, most of them didn't even know how to write a creative brief. So when they first started writing project briefs, it would just be, one sentence like, I want a poster. Yeah. So when you don't know why something is so important, it's very easy to actually dismiss creative work as a low priority. So how I countered this was to create some useful resources for them to see and learn how valuable design can be to their organization and goals. And what I hope is that as a creative, you can even share this with your nonprofit or your client if they're not convinced. Since the months of launching Making Meaning, I always try to check in with volunteers from time to time. And it's been really heartening to receive messages from them and find out more about their experience. Interestingly, volunteering actually helped many of them, you know, um, with their mental well-being during this time. Students told me that volunteering gave them confidence in their skills and the potential to keep doing good. And professionals shared with me that they felt a renewed sense of purpose and redirected their anxiety as they could spend their free time, between jobs after work doing something meaningful. Overall, the sentiment was that making meaning left them in a happier place. So after these conversations, I truly understood the role that making meaning could play, both in uplifting the design community and empowering creatives to, change the way that they see their own role and career. For the wider society to truly appreciate design, it has to begin with us valuing our own skills and approaching design work with that same attitude. We're just starting, but I hope to eventually cover all sorts of topics and issues that creators struggle with, including work-life balance, imposter syndrome, or even what it means to come out of your comfort zone. When posting about project openings or sharing completed projects, I also make it a point to explain the real-life impact of the work, be it getting shares on a fundraising campaign or attracting more signups for a new initiative. Okay, so to end this, let me just share this slide with a snippet of the works that our creative volunteers have done so far. It may not look like much, but it's part of a wider growing collective movement to get the general public more aware and involved in understanding, participating, and helping the community. Yeah, we hope to keep growing and doing more. So if you're interested in joining in, please do. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, just just wanted to, just thank you for sharing all the range of different projects that everyone has done. I'm sure we would like to find out more about, how it has impacted the nonprofits directly and how it has changed the work over, how it has changed, the approach moving forward, especially looking for help across different areas. How, when you're looking for volunteers, it's not just about how I'm looking for volunteers is not just about soliciting funds, but also finding people who have a heart and can blend all these things together. So we have a question from someone, but I'll keep all the questions to the end of this, and also thank you for some of the questions so far. So they're really intense questions and really exciting ones. I'll go through all of them towards the end of our session after this. So let me just move on to the next speaker, Bernie. And I'm sure many of you have heard of tape measures. So this is a brilliant visual archive that documents the charm of everyday design in the form of social distancing or safe distancing markers all around Singapore, and I'm sure all around the world as well. So this is a project, I would say is almost as COVID related as things get. And Bernie's going to share with you a little bit more about this, how she collects all these different wonderful images and what it means to, I guess, all of us as we go about looking at areas that we cannot how we make sense of space right now in public space. Okay, thank you. Okay, Bernie, please.
Hi, thanks, Daryl. Hi everyone. I'm Bernie. I'm an artist, curator, and writer, and I'll be sharing about my project, Tape Measures, or @tape_measures, which is an Instagram account that functions as a visual record of safe distancing markers in Singapore during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's focusing particularly on the use of tape, of course, given the name. And I'm really coming into this not as a designer, as I mentioned just now. It's not my job description, but I'm here as someone who has been documenting this phenomenon of this collective vernacular design in the time of one of the defining events of the 21st century. So I started this Instagram account on a whim, actually, on one Sunday morning at the end of March, when we were just over a week into the initial phase of safe distancing measures that were actually visible in public spaces. So at the time, I only had 3 images in my collection, but the markers were slowly taking over our city in response to the 2 main rules set out by the government, which is do not sit on marked seats and to keep 1 meter apart from others, which I'm sure we're all very, very familiar with by now. And as you can see from these images, tape was, and in fact still is, the most common medium, despite the many other materials we have seen in the past few months, such as other kinds of physical barriers, or homemade signs, or custom design stickers, or these paint, in this case, plastic sheets or garbage bags or really intense plastic wraps, or even in this case, everyday objects where the coffee shop just used the tray to basically block out all the tables and chairs. But I mean, ultimately, again, going back to tape, I think the characteristics of this medium make it a very logical choice for the ad hoc creation of safe distancing markers. So it's easily available, it's affordable, versatile, adhesive in some cases, removable, comes in a variety of bright colors, doesn't require any skill to use or to apply. So some establishments might even have old rolls of tape lying around, and they can just, like, in a moment just do something like this, which is an example from the basement of Golden Mile Tower, where they actually used this 14-year-old tape designed by Theseus Chan for the Singapore Biennale 2006. And this is not an art space, this is just, a regular, like the kind of bukata or whatever Thai restaurants in the basement of Golden Mile Tower. And actually, I spoke to Theseus because of this and talked to him about how I myself have, like, still have rolls of this tape from the Singapore Biennale 2006. So if you think about it, tape as a medium is actually this very inconsequential and flimsy thing. I mean, you can see from these that, very soon just maybe a few weeks into the circuit breaker, they're all kind of falling apart. But at the same time, it has this kind of power to physically block off or regulate movement. As people who live in a city, I think we are all already quite used to navigating our environment through these abstract forms. So like the markings on roads or the already existing use of barricade tape to signal no entry, things like that. So in a sense, all of us are equipped with this basic understanding of how to communicate through the use of lines. So what I've observed from collecting all these photos is, so it's sort of quite a few different methods. So one, of course, is very straightforward, single dividing lines on the floor to represent the 1 meter intervals. Use of crosses or diagonals to mark out where people shouldn't sit or stand. And then boxes or circles or, whatever kind of a space defining kind of shape to mark out where people should sit or stand. Then arrows to show the directions of the queue. And then this quite familiar, I think, back when we were going to hawker centers to pick up food, but they were just connecting tables to the edges of seats using tape. And then even writing on tape in these cases, and then using tape to create text or numbers on the floor, in the place of using signs. So you can see, I think, from all these different examples that even within same so-called types, there isn't always uniformity, and they can always be combined in these endless permutations such that, at the height of when you were going out and seeing all these safe distancing markers, it's almost like every shop or every coffee shop, every supermarket, every whatever was like a kind of a different encounter with this everyday space. So it only grew more intensive as we went into the circuit breaker period in April, during which public spaces were basically off limits. So this was the period when we were seeing things like playgrounds and public seating, wrapped in the red and white barricade tape. And there was this kind of, I think, a very over anxious energy to it. And I really think it couldn't have been achieved without tape as this medium and this existing familiarity we have with it, but dialed up to like 100, and kind of creating all these patterns and kind of intense wrapping and blocking off. So while it's already very interesting and strange that these markings were appearing all around us to regulate how we use public space, I think what made it even more interesting was that beyond the two rules, there was no clear template for the act of marking itself. So this meant that the interpretation of the rules became the responsibility of workers who maintain hawker centers and public parks and HDB estates, or owners and employees of shops, businesses, restaurants, coffee shops, office buildings, shopping centers, etc. So I think what you could see is really this kind of bottom-up approach to what we would, of course, like looking at it, would think of as design. So in the absence of any top-down implementation, the onus has been on these individuals to create and design the safe distancing markers. So what tape measures is really documenting is how people adapt and respond to the measures in these diverse ways, depending on their individual resources and approaches to problem solving, and of course, even personal preferences. So, like in the case of these three, they're all representing a queue, but manifest in such completely different ways. So it has inadvertently transformed the urban environment into a series of vernacular graphic interventions that can be incredibly diverse. And even if we take the case of a Singapore Pools outlet, and every one of them has been issued these little footprints that say practice social distancing, but each one of them kind of manifests in a different way depending on the person who's kind of implementing this. So what would seem on the surface to be a very basic system has been completely elevated by all these subjectivities, and that still have this recognizable commonality. And it's become this visual language that can be straightforward or scary, or amusing, or confusing, or even iconic. And this is probably, I think, one of the most well-known, and even I after circuit breaker ended went out to make a pilgrimage to this, to Star Vista to see this for myself. So it almost feels like this very surreal, citywide, community-driven art project that captures this strange time and space that we're all inhabiting. And so what I realized really early on from this project was these safe distancing markers were becoming a way of engaging with and relooking everyday spaces. And that this engagement was spontaneously occurring among so many people from many walks of life. So while I started the account for fun, I opened up for submissions from the very beginning and invited people to send photos just using the messaging function on Instagram with the date and location of the image. And one of my first contributors was actually Azalea, who was also speaking today after me. And being already part of the community, the art and design community in Singapore, I was not receiving not just submissions, but kind of, you know, having conversations with other creatives who were recognizing that this was this unprecedented visual phenomenon that was happening in our urban environment. But besides that, I've of course also received a lot of submissions from regular people who could see very clearly that we were and still are being surrounded by these acts that are some mix of creativity and anxiety and absurdity. So here's an example of a conversation I had quite early on with someone about the cultural divide over the use of the X as a marking. So she said she spoke with a Canadian who thought she was supposed to stand on the X because of X marks the spot. Whereas in Singapore, I think we're more familiar with X as a means to not do something, and the way that, you know, we're saying we cannot, litter cannot bring the durian or the bus stop and things like that. So I think we are used to the X or the kind of diagonal as a preventative kind of image rather than please stand here kind of image. Yeah. So over the past 7 months, I made over 1,400 posts, chosen from a crowdsourced archive of over 2,400 images, in addition to amassing my own collection of about 700. Which are all mostly living on my phone because I don't really have the time to kind of archive everything properly, besides my own collection. So I've also received, because I got a bit of international press coverage for, I don't know how I got it, but I got it. So I have over 300 international submissions from definitely more than 30 countries. So which these I post in my Instagram stories and kind of try to update it when I can and when I get submissions. So just some examples here from all over the world, including this one that the one in the middle in Rotterdam, in a cinema. I don't know how it actually helps with social distancing, but I guess they are definitely having fun with the tape. So back in April, May, and June, I was posting about 15 images per day. Like I had reminders on my phone, one every hour from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. But now as the situation in Singapore has calmed and the safe distancing markers are slowly disappearing or becoming slightly less needed, post only once a day, receive new submissions only once every few days. Don't get many likes, so I'm just using it as like an archive. But in a way, I would say this is the kind of project that you hope will die, because the beauty of these vernacular safe distancing markers is it's in their collective ephemeral spontaneity, but and the fact that they are these impermanent interventions into permanent spaces. But I think more importantly, the disappearance of these markers would mean that things are going back to some semblance of normalcy, and not just a new normal, but a way of life that you know was so taken for granted less than a year ago. So I'd just like to end this presentation by saying that the ability to practice social distancing is in itself a form of privilege, and sometimes distancing cannot be conducted safely or even at all. And even as we're opening up, I think the pandemic will have a long-lasting impact on the most vulnerable in our society. So just wanted to say to consider donating to NGOs assisting marginalized communities for whom distancing isn't always safe, viable, or sustainable. So Home, TWC2, HealthServe, etc., to support migrant workers, and Aware to support victims of domestic violence, and then the Where's Mutual Aid spreadsheet, which you may or may not know about, where people who are falling through the cracks are actually asking for help. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation, and I end with cats. So thanks everyone for listening, and I look forward to any questions later.
Thanks, Bernie, for especially drawing special attention to what is happening, to the different groups of people who can really be benefiting from some of the work that we do as, I guess, as creatives, as designers, or not specifically designers. So I think there's a very interesting question asked by Mark that talks about collaboration between maybe making meaning and even talking about how we can design perhaps almost a design guide to give some directions for different people to block out different spaces or kind of explore this idea of using tape. So I think this brings us very interestingly to the third project, how perhaps all of these can combine together and form something that really explores projects that come out from this time that really shows about how design can impact the community and how design can link different groups of people together. And I think what I especially love about Bernie's session is how it talks about the basic communication through lines. So even though she's mentioned she's not a designer, I think this project really explains how design is being practiced by people with different problems who have to solve it through everyday solutions, whatever they can find. And I love all these different versions of everyday design. So this brings me to the final project. So last but not least, we have this project called Fieldwork. So Fieldwork, is a series of initiatives, and it's run by Judea and Azealia. And one of the really cool thing about it is that both of these are also DEN members. So we're part of the whole group that organizes all these different events and exhibitions. And also that something that's really special is how it connects all these different communities through design. So they also took participants on a virtual tour all around Red Hill, and I was really fortunate to be able to attend this, and I had so much fun just checking out, visiting the different markets and different spots around Red Hill as they really use technology such that it felt like this was this whole tour, which was actually planned to be done in person, was specially made to be done online. So I'll pass the time over to them to tell you a little bit more about their project.
Thank you, Daryl. Well, you summarized the project really well. I feel like I can skip my first few slides already. Anyway, hi everyone. Thanks for staying till now. My name is Judea, and together with me is Azealia, who's on this call as well. As Daryl mentioned, we are part of the Design Associates Network. And so basically, ever since last year, Azealia and we developed a curiosity around how the identity of our neighborhoods came to be. I think there was a question earlier I saw about someone asking about local folklores and myth as well. And that's actually our starting point. I'll share a little bit more later. But yeah, so we developed this curiosity into how the place identity of our different neighborhoods came to be. So being super excited, we came together and we were like, okay, let's do a project to see how we can kind of use design to create conversations around placemaking in Singapore. And ever since then, we came up with a massive proposal to submit to get resources. And it was finally approved after a few rounds, only to be very wonderfully disrupted by circuit breaker. So I don't know if you can see like hints of it in the slide, but we were supposed to do a physical field work of our field trip and spatial interventions all around Red Hill, because we were very interested to build on the folklore of Red Hill. If you don't know the folklore of Red Hill, I would recommend you to go and look into it, because it's really quite mind-blowing. But yeah, so because of circuit breaker, we had to basically change everything. And I think this is how our project fits into today's sharing as well, in response to COVID. I think one question that I was really hit by from the change of events was what would placemaking actually look like in times of isolation. So I actually remember scrolling on my phone at Bernie's tape measures account, like literally looking at all the tapes and wondering how the fact that it is part of the law to distance yourself from your community physically. So if that is part of the law, how can we still bring people together, and how can we still carry out the values of placemaking through design, even in isolation. So I think that this question basically brought us to change everything that we planned. So all the massive proposal that we wrote were basically scraped and torn into pieces. And within 3 weeks, we basically came together to put a virtual field trip of Redhill, because we really wanted to see how we could still bring people together in isolation. So the purpose of this field trip was not just to talk about the design of everyday life within the community, but also we wanted to see, I think the nature of it being virtual, it allowed us to collaborate with people from other domain knowledge. And that's why we collaborated with Myths on a Red Hill, which is a community arts movement, and my community, which I'm sure some of you might have heard. They have been around for 10 years, and they focus and specialize in community heritage with placemaking as well. So just to give you a really quick overview, we took 130 participants on a virtual Redhill, virtual trip to Redhill. And it basically ranges from different activities, myth telling and myth breaking. And basically we took them to 3 specific locations, being Redhill Market, the evolving HDB estates around Redhill Close, and lastly, Enabling Village. We wanted to, okay, so this is the exciting part. We wanted to recreate how the spontaneous portions of our initial proposal could still play out in a virtual setting. So as part of the virtual field trip, we actually allocated times for our participants to wander around Google Earth and take the role as a photographer and take screenshots about everyday design that they see through the field trip, after the sharing. So I just want to show and share some of these images with you. These are all taken by our participants, and for one location only, which is Redhill Market. So I basically let them to observe what was above their eye level. So some of them took all these S hooks, how people hang their different condiments, especially because of the limitation of space within the market. We talked about signages, design, type, and all the different numbering systems, even weird temporary installations like this chair. Then I got them to look at what's at their natural eye level as well. So that's, I guess, what is supposed to attract the customer or the consumer. And that drew us to the range of products or services that the market could offer, the kind of vernacular objects that they will use to store their goods. And then we also even brought them to look below the eye level, to look at the ground, how the different materiality of the ground in our public spaces kind of facilitates and guides our movement throughout the market area, or how the texture of the tiles makes it non-slip, especially for the wet market area. So I think we really wanted to bring the heart of design into the community, as opposed to getting them to enter museums or exhibitions in order to engage with this kind of content. And it was really interesting because a lot of spontaneous conversations around design and everyday life came out of all these images and pictures. So that was really how we designed for collectivity amongst the participants. This is actually the different collaborators that I worked with. So I also wanted to see how we could design for collectivity amongst collaborators. And basically, we are all from different specializations. Me and Azealia representing design, and then we got Izzy and, oh no, sorry, there's so I named someone wrongly. Izzy and Zati in the middle, who represents community arts, and then the rest of them are from my community. So I think it's not just about our different specializations, but also our different experiences and our different phase of life made it a very wholesome collaboration. And I think it was a really humbling experience as well to take the step out to work with people from different disciplines and outside of the creative community, and to be able to see how it's not just design that makes a place, but it's actually so multifaceted. You know, it's all about the community stories, it's all about people's experiences, it's about the building of the place, about the construction of the public space, and of course the people that live there themselves and what they have to share and offer. So I think another part of collectivity is that we wanted to see how this project could support the creative community as well. So during the whole process, we tried as much as we could to involve the freelance community in particular. But knowing, I mean, I think personally for myself, knowing that a lot of them has lost their jobs because of COVID. So we basically got different designers, photographers, and different artists to come together. And with the resources that we were given, we supported them financially as well through these works. And I think that it was really a very good experience of how a project like that could not only involve the participants, the collaborators, but also involve the creative community that we are actually a part of. So sorry, very quickly, the second question that hit me was basically this: what if such projects had no end? And I think the driving factor behind this was that I felt a lot of placemaking projects tend to be quite one-off occurrence, or it could be very touch and go. And I wanted to be sensitive towards that. You know, myself being a designer, entering into a different neighborhood, how can I bring about some form of continuity in the projects that we do? So this is under design for continuity, and it frames a lot of the way we planned out our field work in Redhill as well. So some examples of how the project continued on was that after our first round of virtual field trip, we were approached by Archifest to actually do a second round that is more focused on the architecture of the public spaces. So we were definitely open to that, and it was another new main domain of knowledge, right? So it's another opportunity for collaboration and intersections between our different fields. So we did another round with Archifest just earlier this October actually, so pretty recent. And on top of that, I think that during the planning and curation of the project, one thing, okay, continuity was a really important value to me because I wanted to make something that would I wanted to create something that would last. And I felt that yeah, to give you an analogy, you know, we don't enter into a neighborhood if you want to do placemaking. We don't enter into a neighborhood, put a piece of brick on the ground and leave. But we should enter the neighborhood and look for an existing structure and build on what someone else is already building, so that it's a collective effort and it builds collectively together to be something bigger. So I think that it was very intentional for me to reach out to my community and Myth on a Redhill and Sprout Hub, because they are existing initiatives that have already been working within the fields of Redhill. And Azealia and I wanted to see how a design perspective in collaboration with whatever they had to offer could come together to bring a more holistic flavor and to activate, you know, civic engagement within the place. So I felt like this was really important. And so even now, we actually documented the whole virtual future experience into a book because we wanted to materialize the event and share it back into the community. And this book is currently available at my community's museum and Myths on a Redhill, and also Sprout's upcoming library. So I'll pass my time over to Azealia now, who will tell you a little bit more about how the few notes came about and how you can be a part of it as well. So Azealia, over to you.
Okay, so building on to what Julia has said, so Field Notes is really actually the embodiment of the digital tour in a physical format as well. And it's the reason so is really the nature of how we wanted this whole fieldwork to not be a one-off. I think a lot of times when it comes to design education on things, it's a very touch and go and it doesn't build on. So this book was created with that in mind. So the content that you see in the book is generated by the participants themselves. And you know, this book in itself is seeded back into the community for them to, for this digital tour to actually be ongoing, and it's really something that just doesn't just stop there after the tour in itself. So moving on to the next slide, these are some of the spreads that were being designed. So we made it a point to actually have relevance to the digital space with the link to how the spreads were even being designed, because in the workshop that we're doing, we are actually also educating the general public what book design is about, what, you know, the process in making a book, and also you know, what do we see or what do we think of as designers when we actually touch when we design the things, the medium that we are working with. Yep, next slide. Yeah, so overall, right, we tried to keep things as exciting as possible because obviously it's in a printed format. So one of the interesting insight that happened during the trip was because we used a Google slide in our first time, and someone actually deleted the whole slide halfway through the trip, and it was really panicky. So the spread that you see on the left, it's really, how the conversation of the chat box was like, oh my gosh, the slide is gone, like, how is it coming back? And then we have, thankfully, like someone was one of the, I think the participants was like, oh, why don't we let's all just Control Z together? And it's like, oh, it came back up. So in essence, that was a bit of a, we were separate, but then it was like, oh, problem solving together as well. And then also these are photos, as what Judea said, were images that were taken by the participants. So it's an immersive experience made accessible to all now, those who weren't actually on the trip. So we actually had a workshop that we are doing now. We are running it concurrently. So there's one this coming weekend, and there's another one the following weekend, where we actually talk about yeah, I mentioned earlier book design and things like that. And also it's the whole nature of actually, with now that COVID situation is easing up. I mean, we did take precautions to the event as well. But I think slowly we also wanted like the in-person contact for the workshops. So this is really us going out into the community. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Next. So book as a conversation starter beyond the community was something that I think really, I would never expected this to come out from the project. But I think recently I got an email from a participant. So we actually sent out the books to participants who were on the first trip, and then he got back an email and saying like, wow, this book is really like the virtual experience. And he actually started asking me like, I wonder how a non-participant will experience this book, and he plans to pass this book around to a few of his friends to find out. And interestingly, I think this person actually isn't really a designer, but he also was curious about what's the process behind bookmaking, and he actually listed the different bullet points as you've seen. So I was actually pretty impressed. Like, wow, he actually thought through the whole process, and in fact, I think Few Notes has really carried the heart of what we wanted to do, which is something that's would continue to seed out that's that continuity with the whole initiative that we're trying to do. And this guy, he is also a person who actually leads Tanglin Trail. And then, the last sentence, like 30 overtimes in 5 years, and I'm now curious about how this will look like in a book format as well. So in a sense whereby just a few notes like this that we wanted to do actually has maybe ripple effects of actually provoking people's thoughts on how things are being made. And it's really what the conversation is about. And then I replied back saying like, okay, we are excited, let us know your feedback. And mainly it's like, if he ever does a Tanglin tour, like, I believe we're more than happy to actually attend it. And also, this is how I think, we are really trying to link and bridge things that, if he really wants his book or like, Tanglin Trail to be designed into a book, we are open to collaborations. And I think this is how, you see that there's slowly like, intersecting of like the general public and design as well, just with something that, of a pure good intention, and it's seeded out in that sense. So moving on, okay, even with the workshops, right, we have like diverse, when I mean diverse is I really mean diverse like participants. So there was a mother-daughter who actually owns a farm, an urban farm. So we held the workshops at City Sprouts. It was one of the locations in the trip as well. So you can see that we are very intentional about everything. Everything is actually intertwined, even with what the content was shown in the workshop as well. So the mother and daughter did urban farming, and surprisingly, she wasn't on the trip. So everyone here wasn't participants on the trip, and she flipped through the back of the book and she realized that, oh, her daughter's face is in the book, because one of our collaborators who runs the City Sprouts shared the photos, and she was like, pleasantly surprised. We have people from AI and industries. We have people who are actually MBA students and design students as well. But I think the most interesting thing was there's actually also a book publisher who was in the session as well, and we ended up actually conversing after the event with everyone together. It wasn't just me and her, but really just the general community just conversing in like what this whole book publishing is, what the initiative brought about, independent publishing, and things like that. So moving on, I think you know, it was really nice to hear different stories, especially with the mother and daughter as well. I think you know, they shared their thoughts and understanding of what the place was. So the rest of the participant has never been to City Sprouts. So it was really just a very nice community initiative, because after we did the workshop, she was like, "Hey guys, do you guys want to come to go to my like farm? It's just across the car park." So City Sprouts setting is in a school building. So this is the canteen, and opposite it's literally where across the field is the farm and stuff. And it just became very organic that connections were being built and things like that. So I think the book in itself, this book per se, or what we have like got out of it or learned from it, is that it's like a lifelong education for the community, and also previously how it's a conversation starter. So lifelong education in the community, what do I mean by that? I think there's always that gap with designers or even the general public, or like, you know, sometimes I'm pretty sure designers would know like your parents will not know what you're doing, what are you doing kind of thing. But this is really where we actually educate the public on the behind the scenes of how a book comes to be. It's not just like what you see in the stores, but I actually shared the process, like the design in terms of anatomy of the book, to actually offset printing, which is something that, you know, I don't think the general public knows. And it's good that you know, these are seeded into the community, and also things like distribution. So we actually also learned through making the book with we used vernacular objects, but there was a simple activity, because obviously with barriers and stuff, won't do too complex. We took the core binding and then we just turn into the book, so that it's not too labelly intensive. But what was important here was that like whatever that's inaccessible is made accessible here. So like, you know, we brought like the printing plates from the actual printing plates from the book that we did to share with the people there, like, okay, this is what a plate looked like, you know, the quality of how the print is, and you know, from then on you actually brew this like appreciation to actually things that they actually take for granted, like such as just a book on a table. Next up is we use everyday object to make it to make the book, because I think the whole gist on this was actually educating educating on books with books in its sense, and also like really, you know, everyday objects in itself helps to demystify. I think also a lot of times you would think like, oh, making or binding a book or crafting a book is like, it's very technical. You need to know like softwares like, oh, InDesign or something. But actually sometimes just your day-to-day items, you can actually make something with it as well. So the next slide. So this is I think it was one of the participants who actually made the book, and I think she shared it on social media and stuff. But in essence, I think with the use of vernacular objects as well, it's really our means to actually try to have, as it's like an entry point. It's like a relevance to people, and that they won't feel intimidated with trying things, because these are things they see in their day-to-day. So I think, yeah, that's mainly about it. So lastly, okay, we talked so much about the book. I have the physical book here. It's really nicely designed. So I think the designer of the book is actually in this call right now. Just shouting out to her. Thanks for the hard work together. But you can get a copy. Just take your phone, screenshot the QR code, and then you'll be sent to a Google link form. Fill out the details. We are doing our best to send it out as soon as possible. And also, if you want it fast, you can actually get it at NDC. So when you enter the building in itself, right? At the front counter already, there's the book there. You can't run from it. It's really bright red. And then if you know you don't really see it there, you can go up to the place where Daryl shared earlier, which is level 5 of NDC building, and that's where Dance Studio is. And this is actually outside Dance Studio. It's quite a cozy place. It's an open place as well. I don't think a lot of people know about it, but you know, there's charging points and a very nice like table and stuff. So you can actually just go there and drop by and chill for whatever real reason. And if anyone's in the studio, feel free to pop by and just like have a conversation with any of us. So I'll end this as well. Next slide. Thank you. And also, if you guys are up for like collaborations or anything like that, email us at dsga.net@gmail.com. Or if you have any suggestion with like neighborhood tours or trips and stuff like that, or you have feedback for us, just redirect there to the email and we'll get back to you as well. So thank you for staying with us and listening.
Thank you so much. So thanks for sharing so much about your work. I think, the only pity is that so many people here wish they had the chance to attend it and wish they, could just pop by for the different sessions and all that. So I think, it's great that you have the online portion of it, and there's also something that's in person. So, I guess participants do get to experience both of it. And so, what's going to happen after this is that we're going to a round of question and answer. So there have been quite a few questions already, and what I'll be focusing on are the questions that are pertaining to the projects directly. So I have some about, I guess, the design industry on the whole, but we'll just be focusing on questions that are, about these projects. And if there are any more along the way that pop up, you want some clarification, please continue asking them. So, just listening to all these different projects so far, what really strikes me is that it's all very community focused. So, in making meaning, it's almost like you're creating a new one by building bridges between nonprofits and also the different designers, different kind of like isolated communities that are brought together by design. And the second one is, about, well, for tape measures, we talk about drawing ideas and contributions from the community. So even something that's a bit ironic, right, in a time when we're so isolated, when talking about being apart, how all these things actually connect connect all of us together. And also for field work, we're talking about stepping into a community and how these stories and myths are the things that connect all of us. Back from a shared history to a story, a narrative that's going on through all the different organizations and spaces. So I think the first question I want to ask all of you is it's by anonymous, but okay, we don't have the name, but so as working designers, or I guess as working creatives, have you seen any changes in terms of how your work scope has shifted a little bit during this pandemic? And especially, we'd love to hear a bit more in the context of your project. So has there been something that, because of the project, perhaps how it's pivoted digitally, how this has contributed to the way you work normally, or maybe even some things that you have changed and how it's benefited the projects? So any of you can start off first.
Okay, I'll go first. So I think yes, definitely. I think the challenges that, so I work in a brand consultancy. So I think the challenges that brands face now are really evolving from what they were pre-pandemic. And so their priorities, will definitely change as well. So in response to these needs, my scope as a designer has also changed. We've been experimenting a lot with, things like online workshops and also shifting our focus to brand building in a predominantly digital world. We're also focusing less on visual design, because a lot of clients have cut their budgets and are working more on strategic stuff that actually helps them pivot and stand out in this new normal. Yeah.
Thank you. And anything you might want to add based on, even the having worked on making meaning, is there anything you might want to connect or add to it?
In terms of scope change, before this whole thing, I wasn't even working on making meaning. So yeah.
Great. Thanks so much.
Huge change. From nothing to something big.
Bernie, would you like to go next? Any?
I can't remember. Yeah, just skip me.
Okay. Okay, Julia and
Bernie can
Celia.
design also.
Yeah, but in a pinch. But it's not affecting my workflow because a design workflow doesn't exist in my life. Yeah.
I think that we shared a bit of it earlier as well. I think echoing what Danielle said, one thing that at least I really realized is that design is actually a very non-visual practice as much as it is visual. So I think Aziz and I we didn't really know what to label ourselves when you asked us to write a short bio. So we called ourselves creative facilitators because we felt like a lot of the work of designers is facilitating people's thoughts or facilitating what people were to look at or interface with. And I think that that's actually a key part of our role that has been made even more so during this period. It's really about like how our project frames the way people look at everyday life now, as after these strange times, you know, or yeah, how do what we do or what we curate affect the way people think and look at things again. So I think that reframes my perspective a bit.
Well, speaking of what to call ourselves, I didn't really want to call myself an archivist, but I also felt I went through a lot of different words for like what to call myself. Like I was like creator, but I just felt so weird, like so godlike, and the whole, I mean,
like
the whole
existential crisis.
tape measures can't exist without all the people that submitted to it and all the like people that made these kind of interventions in the world. So I think if I had to say something about that, it's the maybe, you know, this is very simplified and very idealistic, but it's a kind of like a democratization of design, because you need, I mean, it's not like everybody can go and ask a designer go and design their safe distancing. Of course, nowadays you can walk into a cafe or a bubble tea or whatever, and they have their custom made designs. But at the time, right, it's just like we have to respond in 24 hours, and this is how we respond. So I think like understanding that you don't have to be a designer to design in that way, in a way that meets a need, an immediate need.
Yeah, I think it's always a bit tricky when, you know, we have to put a word behind a name, especially when you're limiting it to just one thing, right? So one thing that we've heard today, you know, for example, Danielle was sharing how you know, you move into almost kind of putting yourself as from the point of view of an educator, because, you know, how many things are you going to add together, and, you know, especially in, for example, in the role of field work, how many roles have you played just kind of putting all these different things together? So I think, you know, maybe for the benefit of just everyone here, but it's also, you know, thanks for sharing the train of thought behind this. If you ask me to put, yeah, many times, you know, it's almost as if, you know, we play very, very many different roles, and especially since I mean, the nature of our work is changing, I'm sure we're going to add a few more to this list. So okay, I've got two questions for Bernie right now. So the first one is, you know, what's your favorite? Okay, so someone asked, what's your favorite tape measure of everything that you've documented so far? So I think even better if it might have been one of those that, you know, you showed them, you can pull up. And then the second question, I'll just ask both so you can see how you want to answer that. And the second one is also, you know, is there a chance that there's going to be an exhibition featuring all these things? And I suppose it's also a bit interesting because, you know, we're talking about distancing, keeping ourselves apart, and exhibition will actually bring everyone together. So any thoughts about that, and, you know, even what form it might take?
Okay. Wait, let me just share my screen again. So I'll give the boring answer, which is that every tape measure is special in its own way.
Oh, please.
But okay, I mean, some of the ones, I guess this chicken one, that was really interesting. I mean, there's some way where I get it in my inbox and I'm like, oh my God, that's you know, something I've never seen before. And I think the chicken one was part of it, which was, it was from this coffee shop in Pasir Ris, where it wasn't just chicken, it was also like the coffee shop had their own similar style with the painting, and then it said kopi instead of chicken in Chinese, and a chicken painting. I think the ones that really show like it's just like a logic that I would never have thought of. So like this chair thing, this kind of like accidental like installation sculpture thing, or this, and or this and then when they kind of solve a problem in a way that, you know, you don't really need to go that far, like the Thomson, this one on the right, the Thomson Plaza. I think those are like the kind of like interesting ones, or something like this where you're not actually doing anything by stopping. You're not actually stopping anybody from sitting on this thing by wrapping it with this tape, But at the same time, it's able to send that signal, lah. And I mean, Singaporeans are more or less quite obedient people, so I think they see this and they're like, okay, I know I can't do that. Yeah, so yeah, there's of course and whenever I get a cat one, it's nice to see that. Oh, and I think this one, which is one of my own finds, the one in Ang Mo Kio, it was in a bakery, and I think just why did they choose to do a blue and red arrow? Did they run out of tape? Like, it's like, the kinds where you go when you see it and you're like, there's some kind of strange story behind this, or strange logic behind this, that can only happen because this particular person made it. I think those are probably the most interesting lah. Yeah, let me stop. How do I stop myself? Okay, so in terms of the afterlife of tape measures, I think back when I started this, I was like super excited. I was like, I'm going to build a website. I'm going to publish a book, and I even got in touch with a designer who was like, yes, I will do it. Although I did this very silly thing at the start, which was because I was like, I just let people do the most convenient thing, which is to DM me their photos. So all the photos are like a bit crappy because they have been pixelated by Instagram's whatever algorithm that they use to send images. Which it's kind of like, okay, that's part of the charm of this aesthetic, and it's an Instagram project, and I deliberately made my slideshow out of screenshots from the Instagram, rather than trying to putting in the original images and then writing out the captions and stuff. But I've been swamped by other things. It's like, I mean, I'm like a single person running tape measures, so it's been a lot. I am trying to work something out in terms of hosting at least parts of the collection on an archive, some piggybacking on somebody else's website. But we still I haven't confirmed anything yet besides the intent to do it. And then the other thing that I've done is I donated my own collection to the National Library. So they have been collecting images relating to the pandemic, and they're documenting COVID-19 project. So essentially, I just sent them at the time, like, I don't know, 600 images or something that I had, or 500 plus, with all the captions, like where I took it and what date I took it. And then the agreement is that they will let me know if they use it for any exhibition, but I just gave it to them to use for free, basically. I mean, of course, they cannot profit of it and stuff like that, but I hope. But yeah, and then I think it's a few of my pictures are going to be in a show at National Museum, or already are in a show at National Museum, but just in like a kind of like a media interactive thing. So yeah, I mean, hopefully one day I'll be able to create some kind of project that's summing it up. But right now, all I'm doing is just posting one a day, and just letting it kind of live in that form lah. Yeah.
Wonderful, thanks so much. And I guess if any of you who are in the audience, want to assist Bernie in her efforts to bring it to life in some capacity, I'm sure she would. She would love to hear from you. And okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next few questions. So for Danielle, I'll just kind of combine the questions also. So, what's the response from the non-profits like so far? So, have you heard back directly? And, you talked about educating them, right? So what's the response to this element of education from even designers, now that they find out, how to better offer their work in that sense on a pro bono basis? And you also shared some of the considerations, right? The negative feedback. So how, maybe would love to hear a little bit more about that front. So how education has basically benefited both sides.
Okay. Thanks for asking the question. So I guess on the non-profits response, I should definitely have included their responses. It somehow slipped my mind to include it, but their response was actually very, very good. Most of them were actually very thankful to find out that this platform exists, as many of them actually have very lean budgets, which means that they usually don't spend on design. So they will do it in-house, like on PowerPoint, you know, like something very lo-fi just to really get the job done. So when I followed up with them, it was actually very nice to see that many of them were actually able to articulate how the work helped them. Um, and many of the non-profits were actually very small community ground-ups, like Making Meaning, who are just doing good in their spare time. So um, a lot of very nice collaborative work actually came out from that. Lah. So they were actually able to, share about how they really enjoyed working with the designers and also, really learning about the design process at the same time. Yeah. As for the thing about the negative feedback, interestingly, although it was a very big worry of mine when I started this whole project, none of my peers actually brought it up. Yeah, so but like what I mentioned, this was actually like one of the main considerations I had when I started it. So we actually had a lot of discussion over, for example, what do we ban certain nonprofits if they have big budgets, like if they are rich nonprofits who have a lot of funding, how do we choose who gets help and who doesn't? So the answer to that question was that you can't really pick and choose. So what we did was, because we didn't want to lower the cost benchmark for the industry as a whole, was that we actually kept the number of hours each project can be worth. So for example, things like posters or an EDM or like very simple work can actually be done pro bono. But for projects that are very long, so like month-long projects, so things like maybe a very long annual report or a major branding project, we actually advise that nonprofits should remunerate creatives with a token, 10 to 20% of the project value. And so a good practice is to share with the nonprofit a quote of the full value of your services provided, and then make it out as a donation to the organization so that they actually understand how much this work is worth. So for example, if I do a logo for you, then I can make it out as a donation of, I don't know, however much you feel your work is worth. Yeah. So it's really not about devaluing the design at all. It's more about them really knowing what the value of it actually is. Yeah, because I feel that without making meaning, a lot of the non-profits actually find work through here. They don't even, I mean, they would just not hire a designer at all. Yeah, so that's what we found so far. Lah. Yeah, but that's a good question.
Thank you so much. So I guess it's like especially when dealing with some clients who want to use design for the first time, it's always a case where I've always thought about doing this, don't know how to start. What's the first stage? So I think that guide is wonderful. It really kind of answers the very basic questions that you feel like, oh no, I shouldn't be asking these kind of things, and then it puts it out there, and instead of always hiding behind this uh this state where we're just a bit afraid or a bit kind of embarrassed to ask certain things now is there. And also for designers, you might not even have thought about approaching, let's say, non-profit organizations, and now it provides this platform. So thank you so much for creating this for, I guess, both for designers and also for non-profits, and I guess the rest of us who do get to benefit when we see the wonderful work coming out. Okay, so I'll move on to field work right now. So I've got a few questions. So the first one is, after pivoting digitally, right? So you shared so much about all the hard work that's gone in before it's just put aside. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you face? Maybe apart from the stuff getting deleted, what else in the preparation up to that point? And also now that you term yourself creative facilitators, right? Has it been something that has always been in the back of your mind, or did it kind of like crystallize just because of your current role in this project? And yeah, so how did you come to this understanding, realization, and like where do you see this going? Is this a role that you're going to be taking on, or is it just going to transition to something else also as you explore the rest of the project?
You want me to go
Azim,
first?
you wanna go ahead?
Okay. Okay. I think for myself, with regards to the biggest challenge in putting um the field trip together, especially virtually, was I think there's the aspect of also cause like we have full-time jobs, right? And then like I actually honestly with the initiative of Danielle with making meaning and Bernie also with the tape measures, right? It actually really takes a lot of there's some form of willpower to drive through this whole process, especially when you're juggling between like your day-to-day work, which sometimes can get stressful also. But I think what
Mm.
kept, I guess, everyone else going was, the want to actually see something grow, a good initiative as well. But the day job bit was really quite challenging. So I think, as Jules mentioned earlier, we kind of streamlined the whole virtual trips in 3 weeks, and it was a constant, almost every day, Skype call till like 4 3 a.m. and then waking up the next
So
day to
bad.
go to work. God, I think it was the one day I was like, we had a incident for like the transition to like in few notes also, cause it came like wow, deng deng deng, like we were trying to streamline everything, and then we had a hiccup in the middle of like, oh, we need to cross check to certain external collaborators as well, and then we was like, oh, we have no choice but to push back the deadline, and then we were like, wow, we're so glad we pushed back the deadline because there was like breather space, yeah, in that sense. And then another one for me was more of like, I think naturally I'm not as comfortable, or I'm open to collaborations, but I have a bit of a high barrier. Like I think it's easier for me to collaborate with someone if I know that person personally or so. But I think this project in itself challenged me on that, in that sense, which put me a bit outside my comfort zone, which uh, I guess it was difficult, but I think the ends of it was actually quite, it was not bad. I think it kind of does encourage me to be more open to collaboration. So.
Mm. Okay.
Mm.
For myself, I think very quickly, I think the thing that I felt I struggled with most was the uncertainty, which is I think part of your program name, is it, Daryl? No, I think that the nature of like participatory projects or even placemaking projects where you involve like a large group of the public or participants is that there's a huge room of uncertainty because you don't really know what they would contribute. You don't really know how they would respond. And I think that the projects that maybe I'm more familiar with in the field of design are very controlled, within a very controlled setting. But I feel like there's a greater value, especially during this time, placed on co-design with the community, and uncertainty is definitely a huge part of that. So I think it's learning how to navigate through that, learning how to be okay with that, and then learning how to think on your feet and to respond when unexpected things happen because of those uncertainties. That would be for the challenges question. To quickly address the other question as well regarding the creative facilitators, I think that we coined the term only when Daryl asked us to label ourselves. But prior to that, I feel that I've always saw design as a very as very non-visual as much as it's visual lah. That's why, like I think Azria mentioned earlier, when our parents ask us what do we do in school and what do we do at work, and they assume it's all drawing, and we really have to come and explain to them that it's not. And the visual aspect is it's important, but it's actually very very strategic and planning as well. So I think that's always kind of ingrained in the way I work, but we coined that term under pressure.
It seems like I shouldn't have asked you guys, to give a little
No, it's a
descriptor, but I
moment
think
of
it's a great
epiphany.
exercise, right? As in, like, it makes us think about how we choose to present ourselves, especially when you want to talk about your project. What's an easy way? Because if a friend is going to ask you how do you define yourself to this third person, it always helps if there's something to kind of at least anchor some meaning to. So okay, I think we did just the shortest amount of time left, and it's a final question. I think it's perfect for rounding things up. So the question is, right now during this kind of during these times, any advice on skills for others planning to put forth passion projects? So any tips for anyone who wants to start their own, or who has already started but maybe is losing motivation? So maybe just a really quick short piece of advice that you might have for our audience out here.
Okay, I'll go first. So I think my piece of advice is that, if you're going to create something or start something, you should just go for it. Just try, don't sit around and wait for it to slowly happen. You should just be determined lah, and for example, for myself, I've always had a fear of like networking or like reaching out to new people. And in the course of making meaning, when I started it, nobody knew about it. I actually had to reach out to like hundreds of non-profits and another hundreds of designers, just to let them know that this thing exists. Because without letting them know, then they can't use the platform, and then so I think you should just go for it. Like, there isn't really any particular skills that you really need to have, I think.
Thank you. Bernie, anything to add?
Sorry, I'm responding to the question.
Oh, okay, then let's go to Julia.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Actually, I think that the advice that I would share is to find a support system around you. I think passion projects are amazing because passion can be a stronger driver than money sometimes. As even though it's a good competitor, but I think it's very important to learn how to take care of yourself when you are making time for these side projects as well. So I think finding your support system and finding that balance is important. Izzy?
Oh, sorry. It's like thinking. Actually, to be honest, for me, the first thing that came up to me was actually what Danielle said as well. Because I think me and Judes has been talking about field work actually way before as well. During the period of like doing the proposal and stuff. And then we honestly doubted that it was kind of gonna happen. Like, is it gonna happen? Like, we revised like 5-6 times, like not too sure if it's gonna happen, and then I think COVID came, and because COVID came, and it was just like, hey, we just gotta do something. And then we literally, it started not thinking that it will grow that big, that there's collaborators coming in as well. We just started off with like just a Google slide and like, okay, maybe this is what the participants can do and stuff. But it's along the way, as you start thinking about the project, naturally, I think you pivot and think of what can you do to actually make it more wholesome. And that's when when you are in it already, it will just naturally start growing. Yeah. And yeah. That's about it.
Thank you. And Bernie,
Oh, yes, yeah, I'm ready.
okay, yeah.
Sorry, is the question about
So any
passion
just kind of
projects,
tips
advice?
to starting something during this time especially?
I feel like I mean personally I just kind of literally fell into tape measures because I was just like, oh, let me just start Instagram, it'll be funny. And then it exploded into this thing that I got really obsessive about, that I had like all these reminders on my phone to like tell me I have to post now. And I was like track of my likes and stuff like that. I mean, sometimes these things, they just happen because you see something interesting and then it grows into something bigger, and I mean sometimes you see all those interesting things and they never grow into big things, but you kind of never know what will happen out of it. And if I hadn't created tape measures, I think someone else would have come along. I mean, there were other people who were trying to document, but they weren't as intense as I was, so they kind of gave up halfway. So I think you know, I mean, I'm an artist, so I'm familiar with this idea. Like you pursue these things that may not have value to anybody else. You know, I mean, at the point in time when you're creating it, I mean, I'm like, these are all my like embroideries and stuff that I make, and I sew and that I do it because I feel like I need to as an artist, and that's the way that I'm kind of putting myself out into the world. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't, because I don't see these kinds of projects as means to an end or something. It's just like something that you feel like you have to do in that moment, and then you do it, and maybe that moment takes a year. Like some of these projects that I do, so I think about them for like 1 year, then I do it. But at the same time, it's like, you know, being conscious of those seeds that you are planting in your own brain. Yeah.
But I'm glad you did it. Sorry.
Oh, yeah,
No,
yeah.
but then
because-
the tape measures was like a seed that I planted, and then it went in like in 15 minutes I had made the Instagram account. So that is different.
No,
Yeah.
because I think before I knew Bernie was the holder of the account, right, I was actually thinking about it at home as well. And then I think someone sent me like, hey, someone is doing this tape measure thing, and I got really excited. That's why I was like, oh my gosh, I started asking people around me like, do you have tape measures? And then you should send it to this account, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's really good that you started it. I mean, it's actually very exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess to summarize, I mean, what all our wonderful panelists have shared is that, you know, when you see something, that you just go ahead and do it, because there won't be a better time, or, you know, if you don't do it, something else might also kind of jump in. So also the idea that, you know, being open to all these opportunities when for things to happen, you know, if you find that's whether it's a non-profit, you know, who's looking for a certain collaboration, or, you know, other kind of observations that you find based on what's all around, or even just something that's been hovering in your head for the longest time, you know, just to go ahead and go for it, and then also, you know, be aware of the support system, so people that you need to, that might be able to help you along the way, or those that you can consult, or, you know, even those that you can collaborate with to make all these projects come to life. So yeah, so thank you so much for joining me on this Thursday evening. So just before we leave, so yeah, I always feel that, you know, when things are messy, it's almost like, you know, you've got this big pot of lots of stuff just kind of in a pot. If you shake it and shake it and shake it, occasionally you never know what you're going to come up with. And I think, you know, these are some of the 3 best projects that have resulted from this pandemic. And, you know, I'm so glad that we have them to share with us today. And I'm sure you have enjoyed it as much as I have. And so before you leave, you know, we appreciate if you can just take a little bit of time to share your feedback on the session through a quick survey. So I'm going to pull up a slide with the QR code there, so you can either scan that, or there's also going to be the link in the chat. So if you want to find out a little bit more about the programs at the National Design Centre that we have lined up for the rest of November under the Next Gen theme, which is, you know, what we're speaking about right now. So young designers who are going out and making some wonderful, or young creatives who are making wonderful projects. So just scan the QR code and let me just pull up, or just click the link over there. So yeah, that brings me to the end of the session. So please, yeah, just let us know about what you think about this session, and also, you know, scan the other one to find out a bit more about the different programs. So thank you so much for sharing this Thursday evening with us, and we hope to see you soon at some of the, you know, future events, future programs, and hopefully in person as well. So please join me in thanking the panelists over here, and goodbye to
Thank you,
everyone.
Daryl.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.